On behalf of the access time, we would like directly to the second session, which will lead by Dian.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our second session, speech which will be presented by our speaker, who will be led by our moderator, the Honorable Associate Professor T.S. Dr. Shamsiah Abdullah. To Associate Professor T.S. Dr. Shamsiah Abdullah, please, the time is all yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning. Okay, thank you very much, Miss and Mr. MC, for the introduction. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The honorable guests, distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. So now we proceed to the next session. So I'm Shamsiah Abdullah from the Faculty of Plantation and Agro-Technology, University Technology Mara, Malaysia. And in this session, we are going to listen to the three distinguished speakers, who will share with us their insight, experiences in their field of expertise that related to this theme of the conference. Okay, in this session, you will be listening to 20 minutes talk by each speaker. So the Q&A session will be open after the third speaker's completed talk, and now we will start with the first speaker. Okay, so our first speaker, I would like to introduce you, Dr. Carl Lovell Imaikalani Evensen. Am I right? Pronounce the name, Dr. Carl?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. Thank you. How are you, doctor?
I'm very good. Thank you.
All right. Okay, thank you. So I hope you're ready to start shortly. But before that, let me read a brief discussion, a brief introduction of your background. Okay, so Dr. Carl Evensen is an extension specialist at the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Management, College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, University of Hawaii. Okay, Dr. Carl has a bachelor degree in biology in 1977 from Whitman College, and master and PhD degree in agronomy and soil science from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Hawaii. Okay. Previously, he served for 3.5 years as an interim director at the Lion Arboretum as the research and administrative leader. He was also Associate Dean for Cooperative Extension at the College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resource for 4 years, and served for 4 years as chairman of the department. So Dr. Carl also has published in many journals internationally. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Carl Evensen. So sir, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I need to share the screen. Okay. And I think you can see the screen now. I want to thank you all, the organizers of the conference, for inviting me. It is a great honor to be part of this important conference. And I have to say, in this strange world we live in, the difficult times, it's wonderful to see science and collaboration between our nations continuing in this way. It is truly an international conference. I'm talking to you from Kaneohe, Hawaii, in the United States. It's actually about 6:20 p.m. here on the November 24th. So we are spanning time zones, and I'm very happy to be with you. My talk today is titled Land and Water Conservation Planning in the United States, Training for the Next Generation of Conservationists. It's not primarily a research talk, but I wanted to share with you this particular course developed, which is focused on training the next generation of natural resource conservation planners in the United States. So The outline of my talk is presented here. I'll discuss, first of all, what is the concept of conservation planning, then go into the history of soil and water conservation in the United States, talk about some of the components of planning, what is involved in natural resource conservation planning. Then I will present some information on the particular course developed, which is in my home department, Natural Resources and Environmental Management, course number 467 at University of Hawaii at Manoa. I'll present a couple of student plan examples and then discuss a few of the lessons learned. First of all, this talk presents specifics on a college course developed at University of Hawaii to provide a detailed orientation and hands-on experience in conservation planning. The course is offered online to allow participation by students throughout the state of Hawaii and emphasizes the application of conservation planning process in actual management situations. Managing natural resources is something that is a concern of every national, state, and local government in the world. Everyone is concerned with better protecting our environment, in particular helping farmers to do so on their farm holdings and in their communities. Some of the important components of natural resource planning are to determine how to clean up problems, restore natural resources, and achieve human health protection. In this, you design strategies to allow for future growth while protecting the environment, maintaining biodiversity, safeguarding human health, and preserving cultural and social values. In some of the talks that I heard previously in this conference, many of these aspects are stressed because they're all critical to sustainable agriculture development. In this conservation planning effort, all of these things are put together, focused on the individual farm and to help the farmer to plan for the future and identify the particular issues that they have and plan to make improvements. Now, the background to this in Hawaii and in the United States as a whole goes back to an era called the Dust Bowl in the United States, which occurred during the 1930s, the so-called dirty 30s. This was a time when there was massive soil erosion, both wind and water erosion, leading to huge dust storms, devastated farms and devastated families throughout the United States, but particularly in the middle portion of the United States. These dust storms prompted the formation of the Soil Conservation Service, or SCS, 1935, and the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, which interact directly with farmers in 1937. Some of the really important names in this area in the US are, first of all, Hugh Hammond Bennett, who was the first director of the SCS and really argued for its creation. And he said, if this is to be a permanent nation, we must preserve our soil. This is a sentiment I think we can all agree on everywhere in the world. At the time, the president of the United States was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who also said, a nation that destroys its soil, destroys itself. In planning for land and water conservation in the United States, this is carried out primarily by the United States Department of Agriculture through its agency, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Through the rest of the talk, I will refer to them as NRCS. Conservation planners in NRCS are trained primarily through in-house training programs consisting of a combination of online and classroom courses coupled with mentoring by more experienced employees. NRCS, like conservation planning agencies around the world, struggle to attract motivated employees with adequate background to become future planners in the agency. And this was the motivation for creating this class, to try to help to train the next generation or get the next generation excuse me, of planners interested in this work. Before considering NRCS planning framework, let's look at some of the common elements for all types of planning. There is no one way to do planning. There are infinite variety of paths from mess to solution. Planning in best practice is a creative and structured problem-solving process. This is out of one of our textbooks by Charles Yohe. The task of the planning process, once defined and put into logical sequence, becomes the planning steps. Most planning process involves a series of very carefully controlled steps to basically systematize and make a consistent planning effort. Planning requires resources, the most important of which are human resources, often working in teams to do the planning. The environment in which the process operates depends on who is using it and in what context. So what is an NRCS conservation plan? In the United States, this is a voluntary process. Farmers are not forced to do this. They do so because they have incentives. They have reason to. They find that it's a valuable thing. So it's a voluntary, site-specific, comprehensive, action-oriented plan for managing natural resources, containing records of decisions made by the client, natural resource information in the form of a natural resource inventory at the site, and schedule of operations and activities to solve the identified problems. The other interesting aspect is that the plan is actually owned by the farmer. Even though NRCS does the planning, they are basically the technical help, but the plan is the farmers. They make the decision and they own the plan. Plans can be developed for individual farms or at wide area watershed or community scales, and they can be implemented incrementally and typically are revised over time. It's a process that considers the people and the resources they use or manage. This diagram shows the planning process, the 3-phase, 9-step planning process used by NRCS. It's relatively straightforward, but not necessarily linear. It's a cycling process, which is repetitive, often looping back on itself, repeating various steps as necessary. And all 3 phases and 9 steps are vital to the successful conservation plan. So in this, you identify problems, inventory resources, analyze resource data, determine objectives, then move on to formulate and evaluate alternatives and make the decisions about what is to be done on the site. The plan is then implemented and evaluated over time. In preparing a conservation plan, it usually starts with some natural resource problem or legal requirement. This is often why the farmers come to NRCS in the first place. This can be soil erosion or excessive runoff or different problems that they're noticing with wildlife or crop production, many things. It must consider the land user's objectives, and it's developed using multiple resource management. I introduce a acronym called SWAPA, which we use, NRCS uses, and we use to basically summarize what are natural resources. These include soil, water, air, plants, animals, and humans as the managers of these resources. So remember SWAPA. Oftentimes in the information that is gathered, locational data, geospatial data is very, very important. So maps of all sorts, roads, streams, topographic maps are important. Aerial photographs as well. Satellite imagery is sometimes even as simple as Google Earth. In the state of Hawaii, a lot of information is available on our state GIS website. This is true in various locations around the United States as well. One of the really key aspects of natural resource planning as done by NRCS is to consider the host culture. The cultural resources must be considered because they are recognized, protected, and preserved in the plan. These include tangible remains of the past of human activities such as buildings, structures, prehistoric sites, historic objects, rock inscriptions, earthworks, canals, etc. These non-renewable resources can yield unique information about past societies and environments and provide insights into the solution of modern day problems. What I often tell students is to remember, wherever you are in the world, there have been people occupying this same land sometime for thousands of years before, certainly the case in Indonesia. And it is very important for us to pay attention to how they managed these same resources in the past, so that in part we know why the resources exist in the conditions that they do now, but also because we can learn a lot from this past management and experience. Management practices themselves are a critical aspect of the planning process. This is what the planners are suggesting to the farmers to try to improve on their resource management. Usually there's a set of a number of management practices that are recommended. These can include structures, but they can also include vegetation or other kinds of practices designed to affect a positive change to the particular resource concerned identified. And one needs to be aware that practices may have multiple effects. There is this diagram here showing a puzzle. This shows the practices fitting together like a puzzle. Conservation practices are detailed on the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service website, which is shown here. This is just the first page of several hundred practices that are outlined here. And we're very lucky that a lot of this information is generously shared by the USDA for use by anyone actually worldwide. If you have internet access, you can search on this and look at the various practices and their specifications. When the planning process is displayed in the form of a puzzle, you can see that if any one piece is missing, we don't have a complete picture. All of the pieces are needed for the complete product, or in this case, the completed conservation plan. Also, puzzles aren't put together in a particular order. You can put together the puzzle in various orders, and this flexibility in conservation planning is important, allowing practices to be implemented when the farmer is ready for them, depending on their wishes or their situation. This shows a picture of a fairly new ornamental plant farm on the island of Oahu, growing different kinds of ornamental cut flowers. You can see in this first arrow, this is a grassed waterway to safely dispose of excess water on the site. Also, we have plantings along the contour as well as cover crops between rows. And finally, a planted hedge for windbreak to protect against excess wind and wind erosion. So these would all be components of a conservation plan put together for this particular farm. So now moving on to discussing the course itself. The course was created in 2018. The course number of Natural Resource Environmental Management 467, Natural Resources Conservation Planning. It's taught online to allow students to participate throughout the state of Hawaii. Requires students to study a site, select and study a site, and develop a conservation plan for that site. And it teaches basic planning strategies utilizing the USDA, NRCS examples and procedures. The course focuses on field applications of the NRCS iterative and adaptive conservation planning process grounded in SWAPA, as I indicated before, soil, water, air, plants, animals, and humans, as a resource description and analysis framework. The students select a farm or other land area to study and develop the key components of a conservation plan using online data, procedure, and guidance documents provided by the NRCS website. This bottom image here shows the web soil survey, which is a very interactive site. You can go in and select a site anywhere in the United States and get information on the specific soil types and characteristics for that site. This technical note here is one of many, many types of resources available on the NRCS website that provides guidance in terms of doing conservation planning. And we use it heavily for the course. The students work individually to learn how to identify and assess resource concerns and to develop conservation management alternatives. They conduct background research on the site, sketch maps, assess the biophysical history and conditions of the site, and all the students gather weekly in an online video conference to compare experiences, share insights, and learn new procedures. I think around the world, the educational programs are adapting to the new conditions we live in, where face-to-face classroom meetings are becoming more difficult, and we've had to move into an online framework. So while difficult, it does present various advantages, and we were able to make the most of that this particular course. The student instruction is provided through assigned readings, online lectures, and weekly quizzes to test comprehension. All of this is done online in an asynchronous manner. The students decide when they want to take study the lectures, which are presented as online videos, and then take quizzes and do the readings, which they can access online. Online exercises are really the main focus of this course. These focused students work on the site they've selected, and we have 8 different exercises, which the students then conduct through work on the site, sort of like a hands-on lab conducted by the students themselves on the site that they've picked. These include conservation planning, general concepts, and selecting the site, how to go about that. Know your moku and ahupua'a. These are Hawaiian terms indicating the districts or areas on the island. And in this one, there's emphasis on collecting site cultural awareness information, as well as information about surrounding communities. Then the third exercise is the actual introduction to conservation planning procedures used in the course. Students then collect tools and resources for their conservation plan. Then they move into a section analyzing the soil and land characteristics, followed by water and stream assessment and biological resource assessment. These exercises 5 through 7 are really the core of the natural resource inventory at the site. Finally, all of this information is put together in the conservation plan as presented by the students. Once the site characteristics and conservation needs are clear, the problems and susceptibility of the site to disturbances, whether they be natural or caused by humans, are identified. These are the basis for drafting solutions and recommendations. The final student product is a mini conservation plan, which should be well presented, easy to read, and informative. Additional details such as maps, tables, photos, diagrams, and planning forms are added as attachments as needed. So I want to show you examples of what some of the students have come up with in this last year. I taught the course in spring of 2020, and had some really outstanding examples from the students. The first is a conservation plan for Kauai Marsh, which is a wetland area along the north shore of the island of Oahu. This particular plan emphasizes an area that had been in agriculture, was an experiment station for a while, and now is reverting to other uses, and he was planning for what those uses might entail. Some of the plan changes that he's looking at for the site are to restore lo'i, which is taro or Colocasia esculenta pond field agriculture within the marsh in a manner that considers the native water birds occupying the wetland. Many of these are endangered water birds, so they have to be taken into account in the planning. Predator-proof fences are recommended around the wetland area, protecting both the taro production as well as the water birds. And non-native vegetation surrounding the marsh are proposed to be removed and replaced with a buffer of native, riparian, and wetland species. The next plan I want to share is for another area on the island of Oahu, which also is a wetlands, but is part of a very important historic cultural site including a heiau, a Hawaiian temple, Hawaiian stone temple. This is strangely in a very urbanized area on South Oahu, and this is a fairly small site of about 2 hectares in size, that's integrated right into the community. There is a wetland there, and these are endangered galanuls, water birds, and Hawaiian ducks, and a damselfly, some of the species that exist in the wetland area there. And this is what the student really emphasized in his plan, was to replace invasive wetland plants with natives, create designated walkways through the areas, both to protect the wetlands, but also to provide better access, to divert runoff that's coming in from neighboring properties into a rain garden, which is a way to have the water move directly into the ground, safely disposing of it, and also to create a Lapa'au Hawaiian medicinal garden on the site as an amenity for the community. The last of the student plans that I want to show you is for another interesting site on Oahu, which is actually a very small county park, which is kind of in development. Also, it involves some wetlands and some taro production. This is in the Kapalama area on South Oahu. The changes for this also fairly small site, which is located near an urban area, is to reduce trespassing and damage to the park by installing fencing and signage, using NRCS recommendations, planting 4 native Hawaiian species for revegetation, establishing filter strips of vegetation to protect taro ponds from polluted runoff, and to research, document, and protect cultural resources at the site. Now, the summary of the information that I've presented on the talk includes that this course, I believe, is a potential model for introductory training in conservation planning and as a means to attract the next generation of planners to conservation planning programs. While it's specific to the resources and procedures used in the United States, the basic components of the course could be of relevance for similar training worldwide. And this is my intent in presenting it at this conference, that this may spark some ideas. If there's feeling of similar need in your host countries to look at a training program like this, this could provide some model for how this might be set up. Some of the lessons that I've learned in teaching the course for the last couple of years is that this hands-on laboratory instruction can be provided online through focused exercises. I think this is one of the most challenging things that we're facing in advanced education programs, college education programs, is how to deal with the laboratories when we go completely online. In this particular case, the students select a site, and using these exercises, they actually have their laboratory right in the field, conducting the work as specified through the course materials. This has worked very well, better than I'd actually hoped, and the students have really learned a lot in a way that is kind of self-directed, but guided through the course materials. The online instruction allows the delivery of a hands-on conservation planning course to students throughout the state of Hawaii. And this is important because we have a number of different islands in the state, and access to higher education is very difficult. So providing online instruction in this way makes our education programs more accessible statewide. Finally, this course is greatly facilitated in the US by the extensive amount of information and planning procedures published online by NRCS. So adapting the course delivery to other countries will depend on availability of similar natural resource planning information. I think that's something that is readily available in many places and would just have to be researched to find what can fit into your needs best. So I would like to thank the conference organizers again for inviting me for this great honor of participating in this international conference. And let me say to all the participants, mahalo and terima kasih for your attention.
All right, sama-sama. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kao, for a very fantastic presentation. And thank you for enriching my vocabulary from the presentation. So it is actually clearly show that you have a very strong interest in the indigenous Hawaiian agriculture and natural resources, conservation planning, and you always mention about students. So you are very close to the students, right? And I
Yes,
agree
very
with you,
much.
sir. Yeah, okay, good. I agree with you, sir, that we must preserve the soil. Okay, so from the
Thank you.
presentation, I'm sure that the audience can't wait to ask questions. Unfortunately, we have to hold it until the last speakers. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, please join me to give Dr. Carls a big round of applause. So thank you again, sir. So we will see you again after the third keynote speaker for the Q&A session.